Have you ever stood in a gold-plated room and heard your own father call you a failure? I am not here to cry. I am here to tell you how 300 of New York's elite froze when they realized the uneducated daughter they mocked held the deed to their billion-dollar empire. My pen was sharper than any knife. Listen closely, because this story will teach you the most expensive lesson about arrogance. My name is Violet Brightwell, and standing in the center of the glass oculi felt less like attending a gala and more like being digested by a very expensive, diamond-encrusted beast. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that suggested preservation rather than comfort, likely to stop the 3 inches of makeup on the wives of the investors from melting off. This was the newest jewel in the crown of New York City, a skyscraper that spiraled toward the heavens like a shard of crystal piercing a dark cloud. It was a marvel of engineering, or so the brochures claimed. To me, it looked like vanity made of steel and glass. I stood near a pillar that was wrapped in velvet, nursing a glass of sparkling water because I refused to drink the champagne. The champagne here cost more per bottle than my entire monthly rent back when I was living in a basement in Queens. Around me, the elite of Manhattan swirled in a dizzying current of silk, taffeta, and Italian wool. These were the people who ran the world, or at least, they were the people who paid the bribes to the people who ran the world. The theme of the night was future heritage, which was ironic considering the room was filled with old money and archaic ideas. The Brightwell family name was plastered everywhere. It was etched into the ice sculptures. It was projected onto the vaulted ceiling in lasers of sapphire blue. It was even embossed on the napkins. My family did not believe in subtlety. We were an architectural dynasty. For 3 generations, a Brightwell had designed the skyline of this city. To be a Brightwell meant you were born with a drafting pencil in one hand and an acceptance letter from an Ivy League university in the other. Unless, of course, you were me. I adjusted the hem of my dress. It was a simple black sheath I had bought off the rack at a department store for $80. In a room where the average price of a handbag could fund a small startup. I stood out like a fresh bruise. I could feel their eyes sliding over me, dissecting me, dismissing me. "Is that her?" a voice whispered to my left. It was a woman with a neck weighted down by pearls the size of quail eggs. "The daughter?" "The disappointment," a man's voice corrected, dropping to a conspiratorial murmur that was loud enough for me to hear perfectly. "I heard she didn't even finish her first year at Yale. Can you imagine? Arthur must be mortified." "I heard she works in manual labor." The woman gasped, sounding as if she had just been told I ate raw pigeons for breakfast. "Actually pouring concrete, like a common worker." "A shame," the man sighed, swirling his cognac. "The genetic lottery is a cruel game. Julian got the brains. She got well. Look at her. She looks like the help." I took a sip of my water, letting the cold liquid numb my throat. They were not wrong about the facts, only the interpretation. I did work in manual labor. I did pour concrete. I knew the smell of wet cement and the bite of steel rebar better than I knew the scent of the imported orchids decorating the tables. They saw it as a failure. I saw it as the only honest thing in this room. The lights in the grand ballroom dimmed, signaling the beginning of the main event. A spotlight cut through the darkness, hitting the stage with the force of a physical blow. The chatter died down instantly, replaced by a respectful, terrified silence. That was the effect my father, Arthur Brightwell, had on people. He did not command attention. He demanded it as tribute. He walked onto the stage with the stride of a man who believed gravity was a personal favor the earth did him. He was 60 years old but looked 40, thanks to a strict regimen of kale smoothies, personal trainers, and the best plastic surgeons in Switzerland. His tuxedo was midnight blue, tailored to within a millimeter of his life. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and the visionaries of tomorrow," Arthur's voice boomed through the surround sound system. It was a voice that had sold billion-dollar concepts to skeptics for decades. It was rich, deep, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Welcome to the glass oculi. Tonight, we do not just celebrate a building, we celebrate a legacy." The applause was polite but enthusiastic, Everyone wanted to be on the good side of Arthur Brightwell. For 100 years, the Brightwell name has stood for excellence, he continued, pacing the stage. Perfection is not a goal for us. It is a baseline. My grandfather built bridges. My father built towers. And I intend to build the future. He paused for effect. The screen behind him illuminated, revealing a rendering of a massive, futuristic complex. It looked like a city floating on clouds, all curves and light. I present to you the Skyline Nova, Arthur announced, opening his arms wide. The Millennium Legacy, a project that will redefine urban living for the next 5 centuries. It is sustainable, it is revolutionary, and it is the pinnacle of architectural evolution. The crowd oohed and awed. I stared at the screen. I saw the flashy rendering, but my mind, trained in the grit of actual construction sites, saw something else. I saw load-bearing issues. I saw soil composition problems. I saw a fantasy that defied the laws of physics and the budget of reality. But nobody here cared about reality. They cared about the dream Arthur was selling. But a legacy is nothing without a successor, Arthur said, his voice softening into a performance of paternal pride. A project of this magnitude requires a mind that has been sharpened by the finest institutions in the world, a mind that understands the delicate balance between art and engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the lead architect of Skyline Nova, my son, Dr. Julian Brightwell. Julian stepped out from the wings, waving like a politician. He was the spitting image of our father. Just younger and with more hair, he wore a smile that had cost $10,000 in orthodontics. He had a PhD from Harvard and a master's from MIT. On paper, he was a genius. In reality, he was a man who had never held a shovel in his life and thought structural integrity was something you could negotiate with gravity. "Thank you, Father," Julian said, taking the microphone. "This project is the culmination of years of research. We are not just building walls. We are building dreams." It was a rehearsed line. I had heard him practicing it in the bathroom mirror 3 days ago. Arthur put a hand on Julian's shoulder, beaming. Julian represents the best of us, the triumph of education, discipline, and intellect. He is the future. Then, the atmosphere shifted. Arthur's eyes scanned the crowd, searching. I knew that look. It was the look of a predator locating the weakest member of the herd. His gaze locked onto me. "But," Arthur said, his tone dropping an octave, becoming conversational, almost casual. "In every family, there is balance. Where there is light, there must be shadow. Where there is success, there must be a cautionary tale." My stomach tightened. I knew what was coming. I had been dreading this moment since the invitation arrived. But I had come anyway. I had to. It was part of the plan. "Violet," Arthur called out. "Come up here." "Darling." The spotlight swung wildly around the room before pinning me against the pillar. I was blinded. The sudden attention was a physical weight. A hush fell over the room, but it wasn't respectful this time. It was awkward. It was the sound of 300 people holding their breath, waiting for the car crash. I didn't move at first. "Come on now," Arthur urged, waving me forward with a mocking impatience. "Don't be shy. The walk to the stage isn't as hard as a day on the construction site, is it?" A few people chuckled nervously. I pushed myself off the pillar and began the long walk to the stage. My heels clicked against the marble floor, a lonely, rhythmic sound in the cavernous silence. I kept my head high, my face a mask of indifference. I could feel the heat of Julian's gaze on me as I approached. He looked at me with that familiar mix of pity and disgust, the way one looks at a stray dog that has wandered into a fine dining restaurant. I climbed the stairs to the stage. The lights were hot, making me sweat instantly. I stood next to my father and brother, creating a tableau of the Brightwell family, the king, the prince, and the jester. Arthur wrapped an arm around my shoulders. His grip was tight, painful. To the audience, it looked like a fatherly embrace. To me, it felt like a handcuff. Take a look at my daughter, Violet, Arthur said to the crowd, his voice booming again. 29 years old. While Julian was defending his doctoral thesis on neoclassical urbanism, Violet was deciding that the classroom was too stifling for her creative spirit. He made air quotes around creative spirit. The crowd laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. Violet chose a different path, Arthur continued, smiling down at me. She chose the path of the common laborer. She mixes cement. She carries bricks. She wears a hard hat instead of a graduation cap. He turned to the audience, his expression hardening. I bring her up here not to embarrass her, but to teach a lesson. We live in a world that tells young people that degrees don't matter, that experience is enough. Violet is the living proof that this is a lie. He gestured to me as if I were an exhibit in a museum of failures. Without education, you are simply a tool, Arthur declared. Violet is a hard worker, I am sure, but she is a worker. She is not a thinker. She is not a leader. She is the dust on the boots of men like Julian. The cruelty of the words hung in the air. I saw my mother in the front row, sipping her wine, looking away. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She agreed with him. To them, I wasn't just a daughter who had chosen a different career. I was a biological error. This is Violet, Arthur said, delivering the final blow. A testament to the fact that lack of education leads to worthlessness. Honestly, the girl is better at cleaning up a construction site than she is at reading a blueprint. Perhaps we should hire her to sweep the floors of Skyline Nova once Julian finishes building it. The room erupted. It wasn't just a few chuckles. It was a roar of laughter. 300 of the wealthiest, most powerful people in New York were laughing at me. They were laughing at my cheap dress. They were laughing at my calloused hands. They were laughing because Arthur Brightwell told them to, and because it made them feel superior. Julian leaned in close to me, his voice a whisper that the microphone didn't catch. You should have stayed home. You're just embarrassing yourself. I stood there, the sound of their mockery washing over me like a tidal wave. 10 years ago, this would have broken me. 10 years ago, I would have run off this stage in tears, begging for their approval. I would have promised to go back to school, to be the daughter they wanted. But I was not 19 anymore. I was 29. And I had spent the last decade in the mud, learning things that never made it into their textbooks. I did not cry. I did not tremble. Slowly, deliberately, I let the corners of my mouth twitch upward. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of absolute, freezing cold calculation. It was the smile of a wolf watching a lamb strut around the pasture, unaware that the fence was already broken. My hand tightened around the small clutch I was holding. Inside, my phone buzzed. Just once, a single, short vibration against my palm. I didn't need to look at it to know what it said. I had been waiting for that vibration for 6 months. Activated, the message meant that the transfer was complete. It meant that the trap I had spent 3 years building, brick by brick, clause by legal clause, had just snapped shut. Arthur was still laughing, basking in the adoration of the crowd, thinking he was the master of the universe. He had no idea that the uneducated daughter standing next to him had just bought the ground beneath his feet. I looked out at the sea of laughing faces. Laugh while you can, I thought, my pulse steady and slow, because in about 10 minutes, none of you will ever laugh at me again. The laughter of the crowd in the glass oculi faded into a dull roar in my ears, replaced by a sound from 10 years ago. It was the sound of a heavy hand striking flesh. To understand why I stood on that stage with a heart made of stone, you have to understand the girl I was before the cement hardened around my soul. 10 years ago, I was 19. But the cracks had started forming long before that. I was born into a world of straight lines and rigid expectations. In the Brightwell household, everything was measured. Success was calculated in grade point averages and acceptance letters. Intelligence was quantified by how many books you could quote at dinner parties. But my brain did not work that way. To me, words on a page were not stable structures. They were like water, fluid and chaotic, slipping through the cracks of my understanding. The doctors called it severe dyslexia. My parents called it laziness. They hired tutors who sighed loudly when I stumbled over simple sentences. They bought me books that remained unopened on my nightstand, mocking me. But while I could not read the words describing a building, I could see the building itself. I had a gift that no test could measure. I possessed perfect spatial awareness. I could walk into a room and instantly know the dimensions, the load-bearing points, and how the light would travel across the floor at 4 p.m. I saw the world in three-dimensional grids. While other children were reading fairy tales, I was mentally disassembling the family manor and putting it back together, brick by virtual brick. The incident that ended my life as a Brightwell daughter happened on a rainy Tuesday. I was home from my first semester at boarding school, a place where I was drowning in academic probation. I had wandered into my father's study, a forbidden sanctuary of mahogany and leather. On his drafting table lay the blueprints for the original riverfront plaza. It was a mid-sized project, nothing compared to what he built now, but it was important to him then. I looked at the blue sheets, and the white lines seemed to jump out at me. I did not see lines. I saw forces. I saw gravity pushing down. I saw tension pulling apart, and I saw a mistake. It was a structural flaw in the atrium support, a miscalculation in the load distribution that would have caused the glass ceiling to collapse under the weight of a heavy snow. It was obvious to me, glaringly so, like a sour note in a symphony. Without thinking, I picked up a red pencil. I did not write words. I drew. I sketched a corrective truss system, slashing red lines across his pristine blue perfection. I was so absorbed in the geometry of it, the pure logic of the fix, that I did not hear the door open. The blow came out of nowhere. My father's hand connected with my cheek with enough force to knock me into the bookshelf. The pain was sharp and hot, but the shock was colder. I looked up, clutching my face, to see Arthur Brightwell standing over me, his face purple with rage. "You ignorant little vandal!" he screamed. His voice shook the walls. "Do you have any idea what you have done? These are official documents. You think because you can finger paint you are an architect?" "There was a mistake," I stammered, tears stinging my eyes. "The atrium, it would have fallen. The only mistake in this room is you," he roared. He grabbed the blueprint and crumpled it, erasing my correction without even looking at it. "You are lazy, Violet. You are stupid. And now you are destructive. You cannot even read a menu properly. And you think you can correct my engineering?" That was the end. The slap was the punctuation mark on my childhood. They sent me back to boarding school the next morning, but something inside me had snapped. I stopped trying to force my square peg of a brain into their round hole of a curriculum. I failed my classes. I dropped out of college 3 months into my freshman year because the theory classes were suffocating me. I could not write essays about the philosophy of architecture. I just wanted to build. When I came home with my bags, expecting a lecture, I got an eviction instead. My mother met me at the door. She did not hug me. She handed me a checkbook, tore out a single check, and wrote it out for $100. "This is the last thing you will ever get from us," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "We have spent a fortune on tutors, schools, and opportunities, and you have thrown it all away. If you want to live like a dropout, go ahead, but you will not do it in this house." I looked at the check. $100. It was not enough to buy one of her scarves. "Go," she said, closing the door, "and do not come back until you are someone we can be proud of," which I suspect will never be. I walked away from the mansion with $100 and a duffel bag. I did not look back. The next 2 years were a blur of grit and exhaustion. I learned quickly that the world did not care about my last name once I took off the designer clothes. I rented a room in a basement that smelled of mold and boiled cabbage. I got a job as a laborer on a construction site in the Bronx because it was the only place that did not ask for a resume. The first week, my hands bled. The blisters popped and reformed until my palms were as rough as sandpaper. The men on the site made fun of me. They whistled. They called me princess because of the way I spoke, but I kept my head down. I learned to mix concrete until the consistency was perfect. I learned to haul rebar. I learned to weld, loving the way the sparks flew like captive stars. I learned the breadth of the materials. I learned that concrete heats up as it cures, that steel groans before it breaks, that wood shifts with the humidity. These were things my father never knew. He knew the math of the materials, but he did not know their soul. It was on a site in Brooklyn that I met Elias Thorne. Elias was a legend in the underground world of architecture. Though the prestigious firms called him a lunatic, he was 70 years old, with wild white hair and a cigar permanently glued to his lip. He had been blacklisted by the American Institute of Architects decades ago for punching a city planner who tried to compromise on safety standards. He found me sitting on a stack of drywall during my lunch break. I was sketching on the back of a discarded sandwich wrapper. I wasn't sketching a building. I was sketching the intricate piping system of the basement, reorganizing it to save space. Elias snatched the wrapper from my hand. I braced myself for a yell, expecting him to be another foreman telling me to get back to work. Instead, he grunted. "You moved the main outflow pipe to the north wall. It saves 40 feet of copper," I said, biting my sandwich, "and it reduces the pressure on the junction box." Elias looked at the drawing, then at me. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and completely free of judgment. "Who taught you that?" "Nobody," I said. "It just fits better that way." He sat down next to me. "The name is Elias, and you are wasting your time carrying bricks. Girl, you have the eye." That sandwich wrapper was my application to the only university that mattered. Elias Thorne took me under his wing. He did not care that I could not spell Renaissance or that I had no degree. He saw that I understood structure for the next 5 years. Elias became my father, my teacher, and my tormentor. We worked out of a small, dusty office above a laundromat. He taught me the things that they did not teach at Harvard. He taught me about underground zoning, the gray areas in the city maps where the laws were blurry. He taught me how to read a land survey and find the hidden value in a swamp. He taught me that real estate in New York was not about buildings. It was about air rights, shadow laws, and leverage. "The city is a beast, Violet," he would tell me, pointing at the skyline with his cigar. "The pretty buildings are just the skin. The muscle and the bone are in the infrastructure, the sewers, the foundations, the grid. Control the bottom, and you control the top." He also taught me about the cruelty of the business. He showed me how firms like my father's operated, how they bribed inspectors, how they cut corners on materials to save a fraction of a percent, how they crushed small contractors who got in their way. "They build for the ego," Elias said. "We build for the truth. Gravity always wins. Violet, remember that. Gravity and truth always win." But gravity eventually came for Elias, too. He died on a cold November morning from a heart attack. I found him slumped over his drafting table, a half-finished sketch under his hand. He had no family, no children, just me. I stood at his funeral, the only mourner in a graveyard that was overgrown and neglected. It was fitting. Elias hated manicured lawns. The reading of the will was short. Elias left me everything. Everything turned out to be a faltering company named Ironclad Solutions, a bank account with $3,000 in it, and the deed to a piece of land on the edge of the city. I drove out to see the land the next day. It was a 5-acre lot near the river, but it was a disaster. It was a dumping ground for industrial waste, a swampy, toxic mess that smelled of sulfur and decay. It was listed on the city maps as uninhabitable. Most people would have seen a burden. But as I stood there, boots sinking into the mud, looking at the skyline in the distance where my father's cranes were dancing in the sky, I saw something else. I saw the location. It was directly in the path of the city's proposed expansion. I saw the bedrock beneath the swamp, solid and deep. I remembered Elias's voice. "Control the bottom, and you control the top. I realized then that this wasteland was not a gift. It was a weapon. I went back to Elias's grave that evening. The rain was pouring down, soaking my cheap coat, mixing with the tears I finally allowed myself to shed. I placed my hand on the cold stone of his marker. "I will not just build buildings, Elias," I whispered to the wet earth. "I am going to build a trap." I thought of my father's face when he slapped me. I thought of my mother's cold check for $100. I thought of Julian's sneer. "They want to build high," I vowed, my voice strengthening, cutting through the sound of the rain. "So let them. I will own the ground they stand on. I will not use their degrees. I will not use their social connections. I will use steel. I will use concrete. And I will use this mud." I stood up, wiping the rain from my face. The girl who had been kicked out with $100 was gone. In her place was the CEO of Ironclad Solutions. I had a company, I had a piece of land, and I had 100 years of anger burning in my chest. That was the day the Violet Brightwell they knew died, and the VB they would come to fear was born. The first thing I did was bury the name Ironclad Solutions. It sounded too old, too heavy, like an anchor dragging along the seabed. I needed something that sounded like the future, something that sounded like a weapon. I filed the paperwork to incorporate VB Dynamics. The initials were mine, but to the world, they could mean anything: virtual base, velocity build, very big. I kept the ownership buried under 3 layers of shell companies and a blind trust. On paper, VB. Dynamics was a faceless entity. In reality, it was just me and a laptop sitting on a crate in a warehouse that smelled of rust and ambition. I did not have the capital to compete with the giants of New York real estate. Not yet. So, I decided to become the person who cleaned up their messes. The construction industry in this city is full of what I call paper architects, men like my brother Julian, who design structures that look beautiful on a computer screen, but defy the laws of physics when you actually try to pour the foundation. They draw cantilevered balconies that vibrate in the wind. They design glass facades that turn into ovens in the summer, and when reality hits, they panic. That was where I stepped in. I started taking on the jobs nobody wanted, the crisis jobs, the "we are 2 weeks behind schedule and the basement is flooding" jobs. I did not show up in a suit. I showed up in steel-toed boots, a high-visibility vest stained with grease, and a hard hat pulled low over my eyes. I introduced myself simply as V, a consultant. My first major win was a luxury condo project in the meatpacking district. The soil was too soft, a mixture of silt and old landfill. The pile drivers were sinking, and the foundation was shifting by 2 inches every day. The lead engineer, a man with 30 years of experience and an ego the size of a dump truck, was suggesting they freeze the ground with liquid nitrogen. It would have cost $2 million and taken 3 months. I walked the site, I touched the dirt, I tasted the air. I realized the issue wasn't the soil density. It was the vibration from the subway line 3 blocks away causing liquefaction. I went to the site manager. "Do not freeze it," I told him. "Use helical piles. Screw them in until you hit the bedrock at 60 feet. Then cross-brace them with a tension ring." He looked at me like I was insane. "Who are you?" "I am the person who is going to save you $2 million, I said. "If I am wrong, you do not pay me. If I am right, I want $50,000 in cash and a glowing recommendation letter addressed to VB Dynamics." They drilled the first helical pile that afternoon. The shifting stopped instantly. I walked away with an envelope of cash and the first brick of my reputation. Word began to spread. There was a ghost in the industry, a fixer, someone who didn't care about aesthetics, but understood the brutal truth of engineering. They called me the ghost of Vice B. I solved drainage issues in Queens. I fixed a leaning support column in a Brooklyn high-rise using hydraulic jacks and sheer nerve. I operated in the shadows, taking the money and feeding it directly back into my war chest. But I was not just fixing buildings, I was playing a much longer game. While I was on these sites, I was learning things that were not on the city maps. During a drainage job in the Hudson Yards area, I discovered something peculiar. The official city survey from 1990 claimed the water table was 40 feet down, but when we dug a test pit at 20 feet, we hit water. Not just a puddle, but a stream. I spent the next 3 nights in the public library, cross-referencing old maritime maps from the 1800s with modern satellite data. I found it. There was an underground aquifer, a massive river of subterranean water that had been forgotten by the city planners. It ran directly under a stretch of derelict warehouses on the west side. The city had zoned that area for light industrial use, considering it worthless for skyscrapers because of the poor soil conditions. They thought it was mud. I knew it was water pressure waiting to be managed. I started buying. I used every cent I made from my consulting gigs. I bought a tiny strip of land here, a foreclosed warehouse there. They were small parcels, jagged shapes that looked useless on a map. A triangle of asphalt behind a gas station, a condemned parking lot, a strip of land barely wide enough for a truck. To the real estate sharks, I looked like a scavenger picking at a carcass. They laughed at VB Dynamics buying trash land, but they did not see the chessboard. I was not buying land to build on. I was buying the choke points. I was buying the access roads. And most importantly, I was buying the land that sat directly on top of that forgotten aquifer. But land was only half the equation. I needed a material that could conquer that water. My father's company used standard Portland cement. It was expensive, heavy, and cracked if it cured too fast underwater. I needed something better. I turned my warehouse into a laboratory. I spent my nights experimenting. I remembered watching how barnacles attached themselves to the pier pilings. They produced a natural glue that was harder than rock and completely waterproof. I hired a disgraced chemist, a woman who had been fired from a pharmaceutical company for being too radical. Together, we worked for 6 months. We failed 100 times. We created concrete that crumbled like cake. We created concrete that refused to dry. Then, on a Tuesday morning at 4 o'clock, we cracked it. We mixed a synthetic binder modeled after the barnacle enzymes with industrial slag, the waste product from steel mills that cost pennies to buy. The result was a dark gray sludge that looked unappealing, but when it cured, it was a revelation. We tested it with a sledgehammer. The hammer bounced off, vibrating so hard it nearly broke my wrist. We submerged it in salt water for a month. It did not erode. It got harder. We called it Ecocrete. It was 40% cheaper than standard concrete, twice as strong, and it could cure underwater in 24 hours. I patented it immediately. Not under my name, but under a holding company in the Cayman Islands, owned by VB Dynamics. The industry barely noticed. They were too busy admiring the shiny glass panels of the new skyscrapers to care about the gray sludge that held them up. My life split into 2 distinct realities. By day, I was Violet the laborer. I wore steel-toed boots that were caked in mud. My hands were rough. My fingernails permanently stained with grease. I ate lunch on the back of pickup trucks, listening to the men complain about their wives and the Mets. I absorbed the gossip of the trade. I knew which suppliers were short on steel. I knew which unions were planning to strike. I knew which inspectors could be bribed with a bottle of scotch. By night, I peeled off the dirty clothes and sat in front of my bank of monitors. I became the CEO of VB Dynamics. I communicated exclusively through encrypted emails. I moved money across accounts with the precision of a surgeon. I analyzed market trends, watching the stock prices of the major construction firms, especially the Brightwell Group. They were not doing well. I saw the cracks in their financial reports before anyone else. Their overhead was too high. They were bleeding money on lawsuits from unhappy clients. But my father, Arthur, was too proud to admit weakness. He kept projecting an image of invincibility, and they never let me forget my place. Every few months, like clockwork, I would receive an email from the family assistant, dictated by my mother or Julian. Dear Violet, one read, dated 2 years into my exile. We hope this email finds you well. or at least fed. The receptionist at the main office has taken maternity leave. Mother thinks it would be a good opportunity for you to re-enter a civilized environment. The pay is minimum wage, but you would be allowed to wear a uniform. Please let us know if you are tired of playing in the dirt. Another one came 6 months later. Julian is looking for someone to supervise the cleaning crew for his new penthouse. He specifically asked for you, as he believes you have unique expertise in dealing with trash. It would be a cash job, so you wouldn't have to worry about taxes, which I assume are complicated for people in your bracket. I did not delete these emails. I printed them out. I taped them to the brick wall above my desk. They were not insults. They were fuel. Every time I felt tired. Every time my muscles screamed from lifting heavy beams. Every time I wanted to sleep for a week. I looked at those emails. I looked at the font. I looked at the casual cruelty, and I got back to work. You want me to clean your trash? I whispered to the paper. Fine. I will clean you out completely. Then came the turning point. The moment the trap I had been setting for 5 years finally had a target. It was a rainy Tuesday in March. I was sitting in my truck, eating a cold sandwich, when a news alert popped up on my phone. Brightwell Group announces Project of the Century. I tapped the link. There was a video of my father, standing at a podium, looking triumphant. New York is a city of icons, Arthur proclaimed on the screen. But we are about to build something that will dwarf them all. I am proud to announce Skyline Nova, a 120-story residential and commercial complex that will be the tallest, most advanced structure in the Western Hemisphere. My heart stopped. He pulled up the map of the proposed site. I zoomed in. I knew that map. I knew every contour line. I knew every sewer grate. He was planning to build Skyline Nova on the West Side riverfront, right on top of the old industrial zone. We have secured the air rights, Arthur bragged. We have the investors. This project will be the legacy of the Brightwell name. We are leveraging the entire company's assets to make this vision a reality. I dropped my sandwich. They were betting everything. The house, the company, the reputation. All of it was going into Skyline Nova, and they had made a fatal mistake. I looked at the map again, the proposed footprint of the main tower. The massive, heavy spine of the building sat directly over the aquifer I had discovered, the aquifer that was not on the official city maps. If they tried to drive traditional piles into that ground, they would hit water and the ground would liquefy. The building would sink before they even finished the lobby. But that wasn't the best part. I pulled up my own asset map. The glowing blue lines of the properties owned by VB Dynamics. There, right in the center of their proposed site, was a 5-acre hole, a jagged piece of land that they had not acquired yet. They probably thought it was just a scrapyard they could buy for pennies later. It was the land Elias had left me, and surrounding it were the small, useless strips I had been buying for years. I owned the access roads, I owned the utility easements, and I owned the very heart of their project. They were planning to build a castle, but they were planning to build it in my sandbox. I leaned back in the seat of my truck and let out a laugh that startled a pigeon on the hood. It was a dark, guttural sound. You want a legacy. Father, I said to the phone screen. I am going to give you one. I started the engine. I had work to do. The Brightwells were coming to my territory, and I needed to make sure the welcome mat was ready. It was time to switch from defense to offense. The ghost was about to become very, very real. The collapse of the Skyline Nova project did not happen with a bang. It happened with a wet sucking sound. 2 months after the grand announcement, the Brightwell Group attempted to drive the first test piles into the West Side site. They used the standard friction piles my father had sworn by for 40 years. They brought in massive hydraulic hammers that pounded the earth with the force of a freight train. They expected resistance. They expected the reassuring thud of steel hitting solid ground. Instead, the piles simply vanished. It was as if the earth had opened its mouth and swallowed them whole. The aquifer I had discovered, the one that roared silently beneath the surface, turned the soil into a thick, industrial soup. The 60-foot steel beams sank until they were gone, finding no purchase, no bedrock. Nothing but liquid instability. Panic is a smell. On a construction site, it smells like burnt diesel and nervous sweat. I was not there physically, but I saw the reports. My sources in the trade told me everything. The site manager was firing people. The engineers were screaming at each other. My father, Arthur, was reportedly throwing chairs in the boardroom. They tried everything. They tried dewatering pumps, but the river was infinite. They tried chemical grouting, but the flow washed it away before it could set. They were burning through $200,000 a day just to watch mud churn. Then came the ultimatum. The consortium of banks and foreign investors, the people who had put up the $1 billion for this fantasy, sent a formal notice. It was brutal in its brevity. The Brightwell Group had 3 months to demonstrate a viable foundation solution, or the funding would be pulled. If the funding was pulled, the loans would be called in immediately. The Brightwell empire, leveraged to the hilt, would crumble into bankruptcy before the first floor was even built. They were drowning, and there was only one life raft in the entire city. Me, or rather, VB Dynamics. My company had become the whisper on every developer's lips. We were the only ones using Ecocrete, the only material capable of setting in that specific type of aggressive groundwater. We were the only ones with the specialized helical pile technology adapted for the West Side geology. I waited. I knew the call would come. It came on a Friday afternoon. My encrypted phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed the main switchboard of the Brightwell Group. I let it ring 3 times. Then I routed it to voicemail. They called back immediately. I routed it again. 10 minutes later, an email arrived. It was from Julian. The subject line was, "Urgent business opportunity. Partnership inquiry." I opened it, sipping my lukewarm coffee. To the management of VB Dynamics. This is Dr. Julian Brightwell, lead architect of the Skyline Nova project. We have encountered some minor geological anomalies at our site and understand your firm specializes in niche foundation solutions. We are willing to offer you a subcontract to assist with the initial phase. I expect a meeting with your CEO tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock at our offices to discuss the terms. Do not be late. I laughed, even with a knife at his throat. Julian still thought he was holding the handle. Minor geological anomalies. He called a catastrophic aquifer breach an anomaly, and he expected a meeting. I typed a reply, keeping my identity shielded behind the generic adminvbdynamics.com address. Dr. Brightwell. The CEO is currently unavailable. He is in the field surveying a site in Jersey. We are not accepting new subcontracts at this time. Good luck with your anomaly. I hit send. The response took less than 2 minutes. This is unacceptable. We are talking about the most significant architectural project in New York history. Name your price for a meeting. I let him sweat for 2 days. I monitored the stock price of the Brightwell Group. It dipped by 4% as rumors of the site problems leaked to the press. On Monday morning, I decided it was time to move a pawn. I called Marcus into my office. Marcus was my lawyer, my face, and my shield. He was a shark in a 3-piece suit, a man I had poached from a top corporate firm because he was tired of defending guilty pharmaceutical companies and wanted to do something interesting. He knew exactly who I was and what my relationship with the Brightwells was. He found the whole vendetta delightfully cinematic. "It is time," I told him, sliding a folder across my desk. "Julian is desperate. They have less than 80 days before the banks foreclose. Go see them." "Do I get to be nice?" Marcus asked, checking his cufflinks. "No," I said. "You get to be expensive." Marcus arrived at the Brightwell headquarters at noon. I stayed in my warehouse, but I was in the room with them. 6 months earlier, for Julian's 30th birthday, I had sent him a gift. It was an anonymous package containing a rare, limited edition architectural model of the Parthenon, made of alabaster. Julian loved expensive, useless things. I knew he would put it on the display shelf in the executive conference room, right next to his diplomas. Inside the base of the Parthenon was a high-fidelity listening device with a battery life of 3 years. I put on my headphones and adjusted the frequency. The audio was crystal clear. "This is an outrage," My father's voice came through. I could hear the squeak of his leather chair. Who does this startup think they are? Sending a lawyer? I asked for the CEO. Mr. Brightwell. Marcus's voice was smooth, calm, and dangerously polite. My client, the CEO of VB? Dynamics is a very hands-on individual. He is currently underground, inspecting a sewage retrofit. He trusts me to handle the paperwork. Unless, of course, you would prefer to wait until he surfaces? Perhaps in another month? We do not have a month, Julian snapped. Just tell us the price. We need the EcoCrete technology and your pile drivers. We will pay 10% above market rate. 10%? Marcus chuckled. It was a dry sound. I am afraid you misunderstand the situation. Dr. Brightwell, we are not looking for a job. We are looking for a partnership. Partnership? Arthur scoffed. With a glorified cement mixer? Don't make me laugh. The ground at your site is unstable, Marcus stated, dropping the pleasantries. Without our technology, Skyline Nova is just a very expensive hole in the mud. We know the banks have given you a deadline. We know you are bleeding cash. Silence. He had them. Here are the terms, Marcus continued. I could hear the rustle of paper as he slid the contract across the mahogany table. VB, Dynamics will stabilize the foundation and provide the EcoCrete. We guarantee the structural integrity for 100 years. And in return? Julian asked, his voice tight. In return, Marcus said, we require 40% of the gross profits from the Skyline Nova project, not net, gross. You are insane, Arthur roared. I heard a hand slam against the table. 40%? That is robbery. That is half our margin. And, Marcus ignored the outburst, we require absolute technical control over the construction process. If we say a beam moves, it moves. If we say the design is flawed, it changes. No debates, no committee meetings. You want to hijack my building, Julian hissed. We want to save your building, Marcus corrected. Take it or leave it. You have 24 hours. After that, the price goes up to 50%. I heard the sound of a chair scraping back. Get out, Arthur said. I will leave the contract here, Marcus said. I suggest you read the fine print. It is illuminating. I heard the door close. Marcus had left the building. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes, listening to the aftermath. This was the part I had been waiting for. Greedy bastards, Arthur muttered. Vultures, that is what they are. We can't sign this. Father, Julian whined. 40%? And they want to dictate the design? It's humiliating. Do we have a choice? My mother's voice chimed in. I hadn't realized she was in the room until now. If the investors pull out, we lose the house in the Hamptons. We lose the penthouse. We lose everything. Arthur. I know, Arthur snapped. I know. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of Julian pacing. Who is this CEO anyway? Julian asked. This VB character? Nobody has ever seen him. They say he wears a mask on site. Probably some ugly little troll who got lucky with a chemistry set, Arthur spat. Some uneducated nobody who thinks he can hold a gun to the head of the Brightwell family. I bet he doesn't even know which fork to use at dinner. I smiled. Keep talking. Father, dig the hole deeper. We sign it, Arthur decided, his voice dripping with venom. We sign it. We let them fix the foundation, and then we bury them. Once the building is up, we will find a loophole. We will sue them for negligence. We will tie them up in court for 20 years. No construction company survives a lawsuit from us. Smart, Julian agreed. Let them do the dirty work. We will take the credit. And check the contract, Arthur added. Make sure there is nothing in there that gives them ownership of the land. I looked at it, Julian said dismissively. It is standard boilerplate, liability, insurance, force majeure. The only weird thing is some clause about respect and conduct, but that is just HR nonsense. My heart skipped a beat. They didn't read it, or rather, They read it with the eyes of arrogant men who believed laws were written for other people. The clause was buried on page 42, section 14, paragraph 2. It was titled, Mutual Respect and Professional Conduct. It read, In the interest of maintaining a harmonious working relationship, Party A, the Brightwell Group, agrees to treat all employees and representatives of Party B, B, Dynamics, with professional dignity. In the event that Party A or its principal shareholders are found to have publicly insulted, defamed, or questioned the capability of the authorized representative of Party B, this contract shall be considered in material breach. The penalty for such breach shall be the immediate revocation of all intellectual property licenses, Ecocrete, and the immediate transfer of all surface rights and improvements to the owner of the subterranean land parcels currently held by Vice Dynamics. It was a mouthful of legalese, but translated into plain English, it meant, if you insult me to my face, I own your building. And because they didn't know I was the representative, they thought it was just a clause to protect Marcus or the site workers from verbal abuse. They thought it was a be nice rule. They had no idea it was a guillotine. Just HR nonsense, Julian repeated. I will sign it. I heard the scratch of a fountain pen on paper. The sound was sweeter than any symphony. Done, Arthur said. Send it back to the Vulture. Tell him he has his deal. But tell him I don't ever want to see his face. You won't, I whispered to the empty warehouse. You will see mine. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now, all I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to spring it. The next 3 months were a blur of activity. VB. Dynamics moved on to the site. I did not go personally. I sent my crews. I sent the Ecocrete. I managed the operation remotely. Watching through the cameras we installed, I watched as my technology saved them. The piles held. The foundation cured. The water was pushed back. The Skyline Nova began to rise out of the mud. Confident and strong, resting entirely on the support I provided. Every week, I received reports from Marcus. The Brightwells were getting confident again. The stock price was recovering. They were already planning the gala to celebrate the completion of the critical phase. That was the event mentioned in the invitation. The Future Heritage Gala at the Glass Oculi. They wanted to celebrate their genius. They wanted to show the world that they had conquered the impossible. I received the invitation email from my mother 3 weeks before the event. Violet, we are hosting a celebration for the success of the Skyline Nova Foundation. It will be a very high-profile event. Your father and I discussed it, and we think you should come, not to sit with us, of course, but it would be good for you to see what Julian has accomplished. Perhaps it will inspire you to go back to night school. Please try to dress appropriately. No work boots. I held the printed invitation in my hand. It was heavy cardstock with gold leaf lettering. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. They invited me, I said. Are you going? Marcus asked. Yes, I replied. But I need you to prepare one more document, the reveal protocol. You are going to trigger the clause? Not until they give me a reason, I said. But I know my family. They cannot help themselves. They will put me on a stage. They will try to humiliate me. And when they do, Marcus finished for me, excitement in his voice. They will be insulting the authorized representative of Party B. Exactly, I said. And Marcus? Make sure the transfer of deed is ready to execute electronically. I want the building to be mine before the applause stops. Understood, he said. Good luck, boss. I hung up. I looked at the calendar on the wall. The date of the gala was circled in red ink. I walked over to the closet in the corner of my office. Inside, hanging next to my high-visibility vest and hard hat, was a white suit. It was not a dress. It was a power suit, sharp, tailored, and pristine. I had paid $4,000 for it. I ran my hand down the lapel. No work boots, I whispered, repeating my mother's words. Don't worry, Mother, I will be wearing heels. I want you to hear me coming. The chess game was over. I had checkmate in 3 moves. They just didn't know the king was already dead. The Skyline Nova project was saved. The helical piles my company installed had bitten deep into the bedrock, pinning the skyscraper to the earth like a butterfly in a display case. The Ecocrete foundation had cured to a hardness that rivaled granite, forming a waterproof barrier against the subterranean river that had threatened to swallow the family fortune. To the naked eye, the building was rising. To the informed eye, it was a miracle of modern engineering. To my family, it was simply an opportunity to pat themselves on the back for a job they did not do. The invitation came 3 days after the final structural inspection was signed off. It was not an email this time. It was a phone call. My phone buzzed on my desk, vibrating against a stack of invoices. The screen displayed "Mother." I stared at it for a long moment. We had not spoken verbally in 2 years. I cleared my throat, composed my face into a mask of neutrality, and answered. "Hello, Mother," I said. "Violet," her voice came through the speaker, dripping with a sweetness that was as artificial as the sweetener she put in her tea. "I was afraid you wouldn't pick up. I assume you are busy? With whatever it is you do?" "I am working," I replied simply. "Well, that is good," she said, though her tone suggested she believed my work involved digging ditches. "I am calling with wonderful news. Your father and Julian have done it. The Skyline Nova is a success. The investors are thrilled. We are hosting a gala at the Glass Oculi to celebrate the completion of the foundation phase. It is going to be the event of the season." "I heard," I said. "Congratulations." "Yes, well," she let out a small, breathless laugh. "It has been a Herculean effort. Julian has been brilliant, truly brilliant. He managed the crisis with such poise. We are so proud." I almost laughed. Julian's poise had consisted of hyperventilating in the boardroom while Marcus dictated the terms of their surrender. "We want you to be there, Violet," she continued. "I know it is not your scene, but your father and I think it is important. It would be good for you to see what your brother has achieved. Perhaps seeing a project of this magnitude, up close, will inspire you. Maybe it will encourage you to finally go back to school. It is never too late to try again. Darling, even for you." There it was, the hook. She did not want me there to celebrate family. She wanted me there as a prop. She wanted the failure daughter standing next to the genius son. She wanted the visual contrast, Julian in his tuxedo, the architect of the future, and Violet, the cautionary tale of what happens when you don't listen to your parents. I was to be the shadow that made Julian shine brighter. "I would love to come," I said, my voice steady. "Thank you for thinking of me." "Oh, wonderful." She sounded genuinely surprised. "Now, Violet, please listen. This is a black tie event. The press will be there. Please try to look presentable. I can send you some money if you need to rent a dress. We don't want you looking like a pauper in the photos." "That will not be necessary," I said. "I have something to wear." "Good," she said dismissively. "See you there. 7 o'clock. Don't be late." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked at the reflection of my office in the black screen. They wanted a pauper. They wanted a girl who looked like she had scraped together her last dimes to rent a polyester gown. I decided right then that I would not give them what they wanted. That afternoon, I drove my battered pickup truck to Madison Avenue. I parked between 2 limousines, ignoring the dirty looks from the chauffeurs, and walked into the atelier of Giovanni Russo. He was an old-school tailor, a man who had made suits for presidents and mob bosses alike. He did not care about gender. He cared about the cut. "I need armor," I told him as I walked in. Giovanni looked up from his fabric swatches. He scanned me, his eyes taking in my posture, the way I held my shoulders. He nodded once. "Silk or wool?" "Wool," I said. "Italian. High thread count. White. Pure. Blinding white." "For a wedding?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "For a war," I corrected. We spent 2 hours measuring. I did not want a dress. A dress implied softness. A dress invited judgment on my body. I wanted a suit. I wanted sharp lines, I wanted shoulders that looked like they could carry a skyscraper. I wanted trousers with a crease sharp enough to cut glass. "It will cost you $4,000, Giovanni said as he pinned the fabric at my waist. "Cash." "Double it," I said, pulling a thick envelope from my bag. "I need it ready in 48 hours, and I need it to fit like a second skin." Giovanni took the envelope, counted it with lightning speed, and smiled. "Come back on Thursday. You will look dangerous." With the armor secured, I moved to the second phase of my preparation. The weapon. I arranged a meeting with Charles Sterling, the director of First City Bank. First City was the primary lender for the Brightwell Group. They held the mortgage on the Skyline Nova site, the loans for the construction materials, and even the personal liens on my parents' estate. If the Brightwells sneezed, Charles Sterling handed them a tissue. Getting the meeting was difficult. His secretary told me he was booked for 3 months. She told me he did not meet with independent contractors. "Tell him I am the CEO of VA Dynamics," I told her. "Tell him I own the ground his investment is sitting on, and tell him if he does not see me today, I will trigger a lien that will freeze his assets for a year." I was in his office 30 minutes later. Charles Sterling was a man who looked like he was made of old leather and expensive scotch. He sat behind a desk that was larger than my first apartment. Looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and annoyance, I was wearing my site clothes, clean jeans and a blazer, but definitely not the attire of his usual clientele. "You have 5 minutes, Sterling said, not offering me a seat. "You made some very aggressive threats to my assistant. I hope you realize that VB Dynamics is a subcontractor. You do not dictate terms to First City Bank." "I am not here to dictate," I said, remaining standing. "I am here to clarify." I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a balance sheet, not for VB Dynamics, but for me personally. I slid it across the polished mahogany desk. Sterling picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it were dirty. He glanced at it, then he stopped. He adjusted his glasses. He looked closer. His eyes widened. "This," he stammered, "this is a verified statement of assets, liquid capital, real estate holdings, intellectual property valuation. Look at the total," I said softly. He looked. $300 million. He looked up at me, his mouth slightly open. The annoyance was gone, replaced by shock. "My father, Arthur Brightwell, is currently worth about $80 million on paper," I said, reciting the numbers I had memorized. "But $60 million of that is leveraged debt held by your bank. In reality, he is worth $20 million. I am worth 15 times that." "You are Violet Brightwell," Sterling whispered. "The estranged daughter, the failure." I finished for him. "Yes, that is the narrative, but narratives do not pay interest. Mr. Sterling, assets do." I pulled out a second document. This was the contract Marcus had negotiated with the Brightwell Group. I pointed to the default clause. "I control the technology that keeps the Skyline Nova standing," I explained, "and I own the land underneath it. And as of this morning, I have purchased the secondary loans you sold off to the hedge funds last week." Sterling turned pale. "You bought the debt?" "I own 40% of their debt," I said, "and I am prepared to buy the rest, right now, at face value." Sterling sat back in his chair. He was a banker. He understood only one language: money. And I had just walked in and put more money on the table than his biggest client. "What do you want?" he asked. The dismissiveness was gone. He was speaking to a peer now. "I want your support," I said. "On Friday night, at the gala, there is going to be a management restructuring. I want to know that when the dust settles, the bank stands with the person who can actually finish the building, not the people who are drowning in debt." Sterling looked at the balance sheet again. Then he looked at me. He saw the determination in my eyes. He saw the cold, hard logic of the numbers. "Arthur has been a client for 30 years, Sterling said slowly, "but sentimentality is a liability in this business." He extended his hand. "First City Bank supports stability. Ms. Brightwell, you seem to be the most stable element in this equation." I shook his hand. Smart choice, Charles. I left the bank feeling lighter. I had the armor. I had the bank. Now I just needed the evidence. I spent the next night in my office, assembling the file. I called it the Black File. It was a thick binder containing everything, the original emails from my parents mocking me, the proof that Julian had plagiarized his doctoral thesis from a student named David Chen, a student I had quietly hired 3 years ago and who had provided me with the original drafts, the safety reports that Arthur had suppressed, and most importantly, the signed contract with VB Dynamics. I printed it all out. I organized it with tabs. It was a heavy physical object, a brick of paper that was going to smash their glass house, the night before the gala. I couldn't sleep. I drove to the construction site at 2 a.m. The city was quiet. A low hum of distant traffic. The Skyline Nova rose into the dark sky. A skeleton of steel and concrete. It was only 20 stories high so far, but it was massive. I parked my truck at the gate. The security guards waved me through. They knew me as V, the site consultant. I walked to the edge of the pit. The wind whipped my hair around my face. I looked down at the foundation. I knew every inch of it. I knew where the sensors were buried. I knew where the stress points lay. This building was my child, raised in a hostile environment. My family claimed it, put their name on the hoardings, but it did not belong to them. It answered to me. Tomorrow, I whispered to the cold steel beams. Tomorrow, you will bear my name, not Brightwell, but B. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from Julian. Hey Vi, just a reminder for tomorrow. Try to wear something clean. We don't want the smell of cement ruining the vintage wine. And please, don't speak to the investors unless they speak to you first. We are trying to close a deal. I stared at the screen, even at the edge of the abyss. He was still pushing me. He still thought he was the prince looking down at the peasant. I typed a reply, my fingers moving quickly over the glass. Don't worry, Julian. I will bring the cleanest thing in the room. The truth. I hit send. I looked up at the building one last time. The red warning lights on the cranes blinked in the darkness, like eyes watching, waiting. The stage was set. The actors were ready. All that was left was for the curtain to rise. And when it did, I was going to bring the whole theater down. The echo of 300 people laughing at you is a sound that vibrates in your bones. It is a physical sensation, like standing next to a pile driver on a demolition site. My father, Arthur Brightwell, stood next to me with a smile that was polished to a high shine. Soaking in the adulation of his peers, he believed he had just delivered a masterclass in parenting and power. He believed he had put the unruly, uneducated daughter in her place, cementing his status as the benevolent patriarch who tolerates failure but demands excellence. My brother, Julian, was snickering behind his hand, his eyes dancing with the malicious glee of a child who had just seen a bully push someone into the mud. My mother was studying her manicure, pretending not to hear the cruelty, complicit in her silence. They thought the play was over. They thought the curtain was falling. They were wrong. The play had just begun. I took a step forward. The sound of my heels striking the polished stage floor was sharp and deliberate. Click. It cut through the tail end of the laughter like a gavel hitting a judge's bench. I took another step. Click. Arthur turned his head slightly, his smile faltering just a fraction. He looked confused. In his script, I was supposed to be shrinking away, humiliatingly retreating into the shadows to cry in the bathroom. I was not supposed to be walking toward the center of the stage. I was not supposed to be moving with the predatory grace of a panther stalking a wounded deer. I reached for the microphone stand. Arthur's hand shot out to stop me. "Violet, darling," he hissed, his voice low enough that the audience could not hear. But the microphone caught the edge of it. "Go sit down. You have done enough damage." "I have not even started." "Father," I whispered back. I moved faster than he expected. Years of hauling 50-pound bags of cement and dodging swinging steel beams had given me reflexes he could not match. I snatched the microphone from the stand before his manicured fingers could close around it. I stepped out of his reach. moving to the very edge of the stage. Closer to the audience, the laughter died down, replaced by a ripple of confused murmuring. The elites of New York sensed a shift in the atmosphere. They were predators, too. After all, they knew the scent of blood, and suddenly they were not sure whose blood was in the water. I looked up toward the control booth. A dark glass box high above the ballroom floor. I did not wave. I simply raised my chin. Inside that booth was a technician named Leo. Leo was not on the Brightwell payroll. He was a freelancer I had hired 3 months ago to assist with the complex audiovisual setup of the gala. He had one job, and I had paid him $10,000 in cash to do it. He caught my signal. The massive LED screen behind us, which had been displaying the golden, interlaced B of the Brightwell group, suddenly went black. The room gasped. Darkness swallowed the stage for a heartbeat. Then, a new image blazed to life. It was not gold. It was not elegant. It was stark, industrial, and aggressive. It was a stylized combination of steel beams and a gear. Forming the letters V and B, below it, in bold, uncompromising font, were the words V, B, Dynamics. The logo loomed over my father and brother like a monolith. It was 50 feet tall. It cast a harsh white light onto the stage, washing out the warm, flattering tones they had carefully arranged. "What is that?" Someone in the front row whispered loud enough to be heard. "That is the contractor," another voice replied, sounding puzzled. "The cement company," Julian spun around. Staring at the screen, his face went from smug to panicked in the span of a second. He waved his arms at the booth. "Hey, cut the feed. Where is the technical director? Turn that off." The screen did not flicker. It remained steady, a digital flag planted in their territory. Arthur stepped toward me, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "Violet, give me that microphone. This is not funny. You are ruining the night." I turned my back to him. I faced the crowd. I gripped the microphone, my knuckles white, not from fear, but from the sheer force of the control I was exerting over my own rage. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said. My voice boomed through the surround sound system. It was clear, steady, and devoid of the tremor they expected. "My father is right about one thing," I continued, pacing slowly across the front of the stage. "I do not have a PhD. I do not have a Master of Architecture. I have never stepped foot inside an Ivy League classroom." I paused. The silence in the room was absolute. 300 people were holding their breath. "I am uneducated," I said, letting the word hang there. "I am a laborer. I work with mud. I work with steel. I work with the things that get your shoes dirty." I turned and pointed a finger at Julian. He froze, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "My brother here has a doctorate," I said. "He knows the history of the Doric column. He can quote Vitruvius in Latin. But there is one thing he does not know." I looked back at the audience. "He does not know that the ground beneath the skyline nova is liquid." A murmur of unease rippled through the crowd. I saw the investors exchanging nervous glances. Charles Sterling, the banker, was sitting in the third row. He was not looking at me. He was looking at his phone, likely checking the transfer confirmation I had sent him earlier. He looked calm. That was good. "For the past 3 months," I said, "this family has been celebrating a miracle. They told you that they solved the foundation crisis. They told you that the Brightwell genius conquered the elements." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "But genius does not stop water. Engineering stops water. And the engineering that saved this project did not come from Julian Brightwell. It came from VB Dynamics." "Cut her mic!" Julian screamed. Abandoning all pretense of dignity, he ran toward the side of the stage, signaling frantically to the security guards. "Get her off the stage. She is drunk. She is crazy." But the guards did not move. I had hired the security firm for the night, disguised through a shell company. They were my employees, not his. "You can scream all you want, Julian," I said, my voice overriding his. But you cannot scream over the truth. I gestured to the booth again. The screen changed. The V.B. Dynamics logo faded, replaced by a high-resolution map of the West Side waterfront. It was a surveyor's map, detailed and precise. The Skyline Nova project was outlined in blue. It was a massive, sprawling complex, but right in the center of the blue shape, directly under the footprint of the main tower, was a jagged, irregular shape colored in bright, alarming red. It looked like a wound in the heart of the project. This is the official land registry map for the project site, I explained. The blue area represents the land acquired by the Brightwell Group. I pointed to the red shape. The red area is a 5-acre parcel of land that was formerly an industrial waste site. It controls the access to the main road. It controls the sewage outflow. And most critically, it sits directly on top of the aquifer that feeds the water table. I looked at my father. He was staring at the map, his mouth slightly open. He recognized the shape. He had ignored it for years, thinking it was just a useless swamp that he could seize by eminent domain whenever he felt like it. "You built your tower," I said to him, my voice dropping to a conversational volume that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "You built it right on top of the red zone. You assumed you could buy the land later. You assumed the owner was some nobody who would take a check and disappear." "Who owns it?" Arthur whispered. He was not speaking into a microphone, but the room was so quiet that I heard him. "Who owns the shell company?" "Show them. Leo," I said. The map zoomed in. The text on the red parcel enlarged. It scrolled across the screen in giant, black letters. "Property owner, Violet Brightwell." The sound of a glass shattering broke the silence. Julian had dropped his champagne flute. It hit the hardwood floor, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. The sound was violent and final. Champagne soaked into his expensive tuxedo shoes. But he did not notice. He was staring at the screen, his face draining of color until he looked like a ghost. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp and collapsed into a chair, her hand clutching her pearl necklace as if she were trying to choke herself. Arthur did not move. He could not move. He looked from the screen to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that was not contempt. It was fear, pure, unadulterated terror. He realized the math instantly. He was a businessman. After all, he knew that if I owned the land, I owned the building. He knew that every steel beam, every pane of glass, every cubic inch of concrete that sat on that red zone was technically trespassing on my property. "You," Arthur stammered. "You are V.B. Dynamics?" "V.B.," I said, spelling it out for him. "Violet, Brightwell. Did you really think it was a coincidence, Father? Or did you just think I was too stupid to incorporate a company?" I turned back to the audience. They were stunned. The women with the diamond necklaces were gaping. The men in the tuxedos were leaning forward, hungry for the drama. "My family called me worthless," I said, addressing the room. "They mocked me for working with my hands. They told you I was a failure because I did not have a piece of paper from a university." I walked over to Julian. He flinched as I approached, as if I were going to hit him. I stopped 2 feet away from him, looking down at the puddle of champagne around his feet. "You called me a cleaner," I said to him softly. "You wanted me to sweep the floors." I looked up at the ceiling, at the magnificent chandeliers, at the soaring arches of the building that I had saved. "Well, Julian," I said, "I am cleaning up. I am cleaning up your mess." I turned to my father. He was gripping the podium, his knuckles white, looking like a captain whose ship had just been torpedoed. "You are building a castle on sand. Arthur," I said, my voice cold and hard as the eco-crete I had invented. "And that sand belongs to me." I held his gaze for a long moment, letting the weight of the sentence crush him. "And just so we are clear," I added, raising the microphone one last time, "according to the contract you signed 3 months ago, specifically Clause 14, Section 2, you just handed me the keys to the castle." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud that echoed like a door slamming shut on the Brightwell legacy. I stood there, in my white suit, glowing under the harsh light of my own logo, and watched my family crumble. The silence that followed the sound of the microphone hitting the floor was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air inside a submarine right before the hull breaches. My father, Arthur Brightwell, looked at the crowd, then at the screen, then at me. His brain was working frantically, spinning gears that had not been oiled in years, trying to find a way to reframe reality to suit his ego. He laughed. It was a hollow, jarring sound, too loud for the room. He clapped his hands together, forcing a jovial expression onto his pale face. He walked over to the podium, picked up his own microphone, and addressed the bewildered audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur announced, his voice booming with a forced cheerfulness that fooled absolutely no one. "Please, a round of applause for my daughter. What a performance. I told you she had a creative spirit, did I not? This is obviously a skit, a little dramatic flair to entertain us before the main course." He turned to me, his eyes wide and pleading, signaling me to play along. "Very funny. Violet, you had us all going for a minute there. VB, dynamics, owning the land, truly imaginative. Now, why don't you step down and let the adults discuss business?" I did not step down. I did not smile. I reached into the inner pocket of my white suit and pulled out a remote control. "Leo," I said, my voice projecting clearly without the microphone, carrying to the front rows. "Exhibit B." The screen behind us flashed. The map of the property vanished. In its place appeared a high-definition scan of a legal document. It was the contract Marcus had placed on their table 3 months ago. I pressed a button on the remote. The image zoomed in rapidly, focusing on the bottom of the last page. 2 signatures were displayed in sharp relief. On the left was the flamboyant, looping scrawl of Arthur Brightwell. On the right was the crisp, digital cryptographic signature of the VE Dynamics representative. "That is your signature, is it not, Father?" I asked, my voice cutting through his nervous laughter. Arthur stopped clapping. He stared at the screen. "And next to it," I continued, pressing the button again, "is the signature of the CEO of VB Dynamics. You never asked who VB was. You assumed it was some random combination of letters. You were too arrogant to ask." The screen shifted again, highlighting the metadata of the digital signature. It expanded to show the full registered name of the signer, Violet Brightwell. "VB?" I said, spelling it out slowly. "Violet Brightwell. I have been sitting across the table from you for 3 months, Father, and you never even looked up." Arthur opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. "Now," I said, stepping closer to him, "let us discuss the terms you signed. You were so eager to save your precious tower that you didn't read the fine print. You thought laws were for poor people." I pointed the remote at the screen. The document scrolled up, stopping at a paragraph highlighted in yellow. "Clause 14, Section 2. I read aloud, reciting the words I had written myself. "The defamation and conduct clause. It states that if Party A, that is you, the Brightwell Group, publicly insults, defames, or questions the professional capability of the owner or representative of Party B, the contract is immediately voidable." I looked out at the audience. "And what did you just do? Father, 5 minutes ago, in front of 300 witnesses, you called me uneducated. You called me worthless. You said I was only good for sweeping floors." I turned back to him. "You just triggered the kill switch on your own empire." Arthur was shaking now. "This is a trick. A contract cannot be enforced like that. It is a joke." "Is it?" I asked. "Leo, scroll to the penalty section." The text on the screen changed. "Penalty for breach. Immediate revocation of intellectual property license, EcoCrete, and immediate cessation of all foundation support services." A murmur of genuine panic ripped through the room. The investors in the front rows were no longer drinking champagne. They were pulling out their phones. Do you know what happens if I revoke the license for the Ecocrete? I asked, my voice deadly calm. It means I legally own the material that is holding your building up. It means I can order my crews to stop maintaining the pumps. It means that within 48 hours, the groundwater you ignored will come rushing back in. I paused for effect. Your tower will not just sink. Father, it will snap in half. You wouldn't, Arthur whispered, the color draining from his face until he looked like a corpse. You would destroy the building? It is worth billions. It is worth nothing if it is built on lies, I retorted. The crowd turned on them instantly. The adoration of the previous hour evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard calculation of money. Is this true? A man in a tuxedo shouted from the second row. It was the head of the pension fund that had invested $50 million. Does she hold the rights to the foundation? Arthur, another investor yelled. Answer the question. Does she own the tech? Arthur stammered, looking for an exit, looking for a lawyer, looking for anything but the truth. It is a misunderstanding. We can negotiate. Violet, please. Suddenly, a blur of blue silk rushed across the stage. It was my mother. She had abandoned her seat and her dignity. She flew at me. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into the fabric of my suit. What are you doing? She shrieked, her voice cracking. Are you insane? You are going to ruin us. You are going to destroy this family. I looked down at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at her face. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her until she flinched. Family? I repeated the word, tasting the bile in it. You call this a family? I gestured to the room, to the spectacle they had created. You invited me here tonight to humiliate me, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You wanted to drag me on stage to make Julian look taller. You wanted to use me as a prop to sell your stock. And now that the prop has teeth, you want to talk about family? We are your parents, she screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. We gave you life. You gave me a check for $100 and kicked me out into the street, I reminded her. You told me not to come back until I was someone you could be proud of. I pulled my arm out of her grip with a sharp jerk. She stumbled back. Well, Mother, I said, spreading my arms. I own the ground you are standing on. I own the bank that owns your house. Are you proud yet? You are a monster, she spat. A cold, heartless monster. I learned from the best, I replied. I will kill you. The scream came from behind me. Julian. He had recovered from his shock and replaced it with violence. He lunged at me, grabbing a heavy glass bottle from a nearby table. He swung it like a club. Aiming for my head, he never reached me. Two men in black suits materialized from the shadows of the wings. They were not the hotel security. They were my personal detail. Former military contractors I had hired for this exact moment. One of them caught Julian's wrist in midair. The other swept his legs. Julian hit the floor with a sickening thud. The bottle rolled away. Unbroken. He groaned, pinned to the ground by a knee in his back. Get off me! Julian screamed, his face pressed against the floorboards. I am Julian Brightwell. I am the heir to this company. That bitch is trying to steal my inheritance. I walked over to him. I stood over him, looking down at the brother who had spent his entire life looking down on me. Inheritance, I mused. That is a funny word. Julian. I signaled Leo one last time. The screen went black, then displayed a single, devastating spreadsheet. Let him up, I told the guard. The guard stepped back. Julian scrambled to his feet, adjusting his tuxedo, trying to regain some shred of authority. You are going to jail, Julian panted, pointing a shaking finger at me. Assault, corporate espionage. I will sue you for everything you have. I walked over to the small table where the water pitchers were kept. There was a thick leather folder sitting there. I had placed it there before the event started. I picked it up. It was heavy. You cannot sue me for stealing your inheritance, Julian, I said calmly, because there is nothing to steal. I threw the folder onto the floor at his feet. It landed with a heavy slap. Read it, I commanded. Julian stared at the folder. He didn't move. Read it, I shouted, my voice cracking like a whip. He flinched and bent down to pick it up. He opened the first page. I saw his eyes scan the numbers. I saw the confusion turn to horror. What is this? He whispered. That, I said, addressing the room, is the current financial standing of the Brightwell Group. As of this morning, the company is not just insolvent, it is effectively dead. I turned to the investors. My father and brother have leveraged every single asset they have to build this tower. The house in the Hamptons, mortgaged. The penthouse, mortgaged. The company stock, pledged as collateral. Arthur slumped against the podium. He knew. He had known for months. He had just been praying the tower would sell out before the bills came due. The total debt load is $500 million, I announced. The room gasped again. $500 million. It was a staggering number. And here's the interesting part, I said, walking back to the center of the stage. Banks get nervous when they hear rumors about unstable foundations. They get nervous when they hear that the flagship project is legally compromised. I looked at Charles Sterling in the third row. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. So, this morning, First City Bank decided to offload that risk, I said. They sold the debt, all of it, the mortgages, the business loans, the personal lines of credit. Julian looked up from the folder, his eyes wide with terror. Who bought it? Who bought the debt? I smiled. It was the smile of the wolf who had finally closed its jaws. I did, I said. Silence, absolute, ringing silence. I bought your debt, Julian, I said softly. I bought it for 60 cents on the dollar. I wrote a check this morning for $300 million. I took a step closer to them. They were huddled together now. Arthur, Mother, and Julian, a family of ruins. So, you see, I continued, you don't own this building. You don't own your house. You don't even own the clothes on your backs. Technically, those tuxedo shoes you ruined with champagne, they belong to me. Julian dropped the folder. He looked at his father. Arthur was holding his chest, his face gray. You own us? Julian whispered. I own the paper, I corrected. And tomorrow morning, I am calling in the loans. I turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, the gala is over. The Brightwell Group is no longer in business. However, VB, Dynamics is hiring. If there are any competent engineers in the room who are tired of working for frauds, give me a call. I looked back at my family one last time. You called me a failure, I said to them. But looking at the balance sheet, it seems I am the only Brightwell who knows how to make a profit. Get out of my building, I said. But we have nowhere to go. My mother sobbed. I hear the construction industry is looking for laborers, I said, my voice cold as ice. I am sure Julian can learn to sweep. You might think that stripping a man of his fortune is the ultimate punishment. You would be wrong. Money is a resource. It can be regained. Reputation, however, is a stain. Once it is blackened, it never washes clean. I stood center stage, the master of ceremonies in a theater of destruction. The silence in the room was no longer stunned. It was curdling into something sour. The revelation of the debt had paralyzed them. But I was not done. I did not just want to bankrupt the Brightwell estate. I wanted to incinerate the Brightwell myth. Julian was still standing, though barely. He was trembling, not from fear, but from a lingering, desperate arrogance. He looked at the investors, then back at me, his eyes darting like a trapped rat looking for a hole in the wall. So what? Julian spat, his voice shrill. So you bought the debt. That is just business. It does not change the fact that I am the architect of this building. I created Skyline Nova. My mind designed this. You can own the paper, Violet, but you cannot own the genius. I looked at him with genuine pity. He really believed it. He had told the lie so many times that it had calcified into his reality. Genius, I repeated, tasting the word. That is a heavy word. Julian, are you sure you can carry it? I raised the remote again. Leo, I commanded. The blueprints. The screen shifted. The financial spreadsheet vanished. In its place, 2 architectural drawings appeared side by side. On the left was the official submission for the Skyline Nova, signed by Dr. Julian Brightwell. Dated 2 years ago, it was the design everyone in the room recognized. The spiraling glass helix, the organic curves, the integration of vertical gardens. On the right was a charcoal sketch. It was rougher, drawn on cheap paper, but the lines were unmistakable. It was the exact same building, the same helix, the same gardens, the same soul. But the date on the sketch was 5 years ago, and the signature at the bottom was not Julian Brightwell. It was David Chen. Who is David Chen? I asked the room. The crowd murmured. They did not know. Why would they? They only knew the people who could afford tickets to this gala. David Chen was a scholarship student at MIT. I answered my own question. He was brilliant, he was poor, and he was your teaching assistant, Julian, when you were struggling to finish your doctorate. Julian's face turned the color of old ash. He stepped back, bumping into the podium. He showed you his portfolio, I continued, my voice relentless. He trusted you. He thought you were a mentor. And what did you do? You told him his designs were derivative. You told him they were unbuildable. You failed him on his final project, forcing him to lose his scholarship. Liar, Julian shrieked. That is a forgery. You forged it. I did not forge it, I said calmly. I bought it. David works for me now. He is the head of design at VB Dynamics, and unlike you, he remembers every single line he drew. I pointed at the screen. You stole his life's work. Julian, you didn't design Skyline Nova. You traced it. The reaction was immediate. The architectural critics in the room, men and women who had written glowing articles about Julian's visionary mind, looked sick. They realized they had been praising a thief. The shame was palpable. You are a fraud, I said, delivering the verdict. You are not an architect. You are a Xerox machine in a tuxedo. Julian crumbled. He didn't fall physically, but he shrank. The air went out of him. The arrogance that had sustained him for 30 years evaporated, leaving behind a small, frightened boy who knew he had been caught. But I was not done with the parents. And you? I turned to Arthur and my mother. You allowed this. You knew he wasn't capable of this design, but you didn't care. As long as the Brightwell name was on the building, the truth didn't matter. We raised you, my mother wailed, trying to play the victim card again. We gave you everything. We loved you. Loved me? I asked. Let us look at the evidence of that love. Leo, I said. The emails. The screen changed again. This time, it was a waterfall of text. Hundreds of emails. I had saved every single one. I highlighted one from 3 years ago. It was from my father. Subject: loan request. Content: Violet. Do not contact us again. You are an embarrassment. I would rather give money to a stray dog than to a daughter who is too stupid to finish college. You are genetic refuse. Do us a favor and change your last name so you do not contaminate ours. I highlighted another one, from my mother. Sent on Christmas Eve. Content. We are celebrating with Julian. Please do not come by. It upsets the guests to see you looking so rugged. Maybe if you scrubbed the dirt from under your fingernails, you would find a husband to support you, since you clearly cannot support yourself. I read them aloud. I forced them to hear their own venom. Genetic refuse, I repeated. That is what you called me. Father, While you were giving interviews to the New York Times about family values and legacy, you were typing this to your own child. The room was deadly silent. The wealthy elites of New York were not easily shocked. They were used to backstabbing and greed. But this raw, unfiltered cruelty, it was ugly. It was distasteful. I saw the CEO of a major tech firm, a man who had just shaken Arthur's hand an hour ago, take a handkerchief out of his pocket and wipe his hand, as if he wanted to remove the contamination. Then came the sound. It started as a low murmur, then grew. It was the sound of voices speaking urgently into phones. "Sell," I heard someone say. "Dump the position, now. Get legal on the line. We need to pull the partnership. Cancel the contract. Force majeure. Just get us out." On the massive screen, Leo overlaid a real-time stock ticker of the Brightwell Group. It was a red line plunging straight down. It looked like a cliff. In the span of 10 minutes, the stock had lost 60% of its value. The algorithm trading bots had picked up on the news of the debt and the fraud, and they were stripping the carcass clean before the body was even cold. Arthur watched the line fall. He was watching his life bleed out in digital red ink. "Stop it," Arthur whispered. "Violet, please, stop it." "Why?" I asked. "I am just showing the market the truth. You always told me the market was efficient. Father, it is correcting itself." I took a step closer to him. "But there is one more thing. One last ghost we need to summon." I looked at the crowd. My father loves to talk about history. He loves to talk about the giants of architecture. But there is one name he never mentions: Elias Thorne. Arthur flinched as if I had slapped him. "Do not," he rasped. "Do not say that name." Elias Thorne was the greatest structural engineer of his generation, I told the audience. He was a visionary, and 20 years ago, he was Arthur Brightwell's partner. I saw the recognition in the eyes of the older guests. They remembered Elias. They remembered him as the crazy old man who disappeared. "Elias solved the wind shear problem on the Tower of the Americas," I said. "It was his patent, his genius. But Arthur here didn't want to share the credit, so he framed Elias." I pulled up a news clipping from 20 years ago. "Engineer accused of embezzlement. License suspended. You planted false records," I said to Arthur. "You destroyed his reputation. You got him blacklisted. You drove him into poverty and isolation so you could steal his patents and claim them as your own." Arthur was breathing heavily now, his hand clutching his chest. "He was unstable. I did what was necessary." "He was my teacher," I shouted, my voice finally breaking its calm facade. The anger I had held back for a decade exploded. "When you threw me out," I said, pointing at the floor, "when you kicked me onto the street with $100, Elias Thorne found me. He took me in. He taught me how to build. He taught me how to think. He gave me the education that your precious Harvard could never provide." I stepped closer to Arthur until I was inches from his face. "You call me uneducated," I hissed. "You are right. I was not educated by professors in ivory towers. I was educated by the man you destroyed. And I was educated by you." I swept my arm out, encompassing the whole room, the whole fake, glittering life they had built. "I was educated by your cruelty," I said. "I was educated by your greed. I learned that a contract means nothing if you don't have the leverage to enforce it. I learned that family is just a biological accident. You taught me to be cold. Arthur, you taught me to be ruthless, and now you are shocked that I learned the lesson?" Arthur's face turned a terrible shade of gray. He grasped at his tie, gasping for air. His legs gave way. He collapsed onto the stage floor, clutching his left arm. It was a heart attack, a mild one, perhaps, brought on by the sudden, catastrophic loss of his ego. "Arthur!" my mother screamed. She dropped to her knees beside him, fumbling with his collar, crying hysterically. "Help! Someone help him! Call an ambulance!" She looked up at the crowd, 300 people, partners, friends, associates, Not one of them moved. They stood there, watching. They were like statues. They knew that associating with the Brightwells now was toxic. To touch Arthur Brightwell was to catch the disease of failure. My mother looked at me. "Violet, do something. He is your father." I looked down at the man who had called me genetic refuse. I looked at the man who had laughed when I was evicted. I looked at the man who had destroyed Elias. I felt nothing, no joy, no sadness, just a vast, empty silence. "He has excellent health insurance," I said coldly. "I suggest you use it while the policy is still active." I turned away from them. I walked over to the podium and picked up the microphone one last time. "You have 24 hours, I announced to the sobbing woman and the gasping man on the floor. 24 hours to vacate the premises. Get your personal effects out of the office. Get your clothes out of the penthouse. Get out of my building." I looked up at the logo on the screen. V.B. Dynamics. "This is now the global headquarters of V.B. Dynamics," I declared, "and we have a strict policy regarding trespassers." I dropped the microphone onto the podium. It didn't make a loud noise this time. It just clicked off. I walked off the stage. I didn't look back at the chaos. I didn't look back at the ruin. I walked down the stairs. Through the crowd that parted for me like the Red Sea, they stared at me with fear, with awe, with terror. I didn't care. I wasn't there to be liked. I was there to be right. As I reached the exit doors, I heard the distant wail of sirens approaching. The ambulance was coming for Arthur. The lawyers were coming for the company. And the truth had finally come for them all. The ballroom of the Glass Oculi had transformed from a celebration into a crime scene. The crime was the murder of a legacy, and the weapon was the truth. As I stepped off the stage, the silence that had gripped the room fractured into a chaotic murmur, but no one moved toward me. I walked down the center aisle. The sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns parted before me with a synchronized fluidity that was almost biblical. These were the captains of industry, the socialites, the gatekeepers of New York society. 10 minutes ago, they had looked at me with disdain. Now, they recoiled as if I were radioactive. I could smell their fear. It smelled like expensive perfume turning sour on sweating skin. They did not look me in the eye. They looked at their shoes, or at the walls, terrified that if they made eye contact, I might pull up a spreadsheet and buy their debts too. I did not rush. I walked with the steady, rhythmic pace of a site inspector checking a perimeter. My heels clicked against the floorboards. A lonely, authoritative sound. I felt a strange sense of weightlessness. The anger that had fueled me for a decade, the burning coal in my chest, was cooling. It was being replaced by a sensation I had not expected: indifference. I reached the double doors at the back of the hall. The cold air of the corridor beyond promised freedom. I reached for the brass handle. "Violet, wait, please." The voice was shrill, desperate, and unrecognizable. It sounded nothing like the composed, icy matriarch who had raised me. I stopped. I did not turn around immediately. I let the hand hover over the door handle for a second. Then, slowly, I turned. They were running toward me. It was a pathetic sight. My mother, usually a statue of poise, was stumbling in her heels, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. Arthur was limping behind her, his face a waxen shade of gray, clutching his chest where his heart had given him a warning shot moments ago, and trailing them was Julian. Looking like a child who had been caught setting fire to the curtains. They reached me. Breathless and broken, they formed a barrier between me and the exit. "Move," I said. It was not a request. "We are family," my mother gasped, reaching out to touch me but stopping short when she saw the look in my eyes. "Violet, you cannot do this. We are your blood. We are the same flesh." I looked at her. "Blood is biology. Mother, it is a genetic accident. It is not a binding contract." "We made mistakes," she sobbed, wringing her hands. "We were hard on you. We admit that. But we did it to push you, to make you strong. And look, you are strong. You are a success. We are proud of you. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You are proud of my bank account. Do not confuse the two. Arthur stepped forward. He was leaning heavily on a cane he must have grabbed from a guest. He looked old. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as a titan, but as a terrified old man. Violet, he wheezed. Let us be reasonable. Let us talk business. He was still trying to negotiate. Even at the edge of the grave, he thought everything was a transaction. There is no business to discuss, I said. I own the debt. I own the land. I own the building. The deal is closed. No, listen, Arthur pleaded, his eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. We can restructure. You have the capital, but you do not have the name recognition. The Brightwell brand still means something. The Brightwell brand is toxic, I corrected him. I just watched your stock drop 60% in 10 minutes. The brand is dead. We can rebuild it, Arthur insisted, desperation making his voice crack. Together, listen to me. I will give you 50% of the company, 50% of everything. You can be the co-CEO. He paused, waiting for me to be impressed. He thought he was offering me the crown jewels. And Julian, Arthur added, gesturing to my brother who was shivering beside him. Julian can be your vice president. He knows the clients. He knows the social circles. You need him for the gala circuit. We can make this work. 50-50. I stared at him, marveling at the sheer delusion. 50%, I repeated. Yes, Arthur nodded eagerly. Half the empire. Father, I said, my voice soft. 50% of zero is still zero. Arthur flinched. You have nothing to give me, I continued. Your assets are frozen. Your equity is gone. You are offering me half of a corpse. I turned my gaze to Julian. And as for your vice president, you want me to hire him? Julian looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. I can help. Vi, I know the suppliers. I know the... You are a thief, I cut him off. You stole your designs from a student. You have never had an original thought in your life. I can learn, Julian stammered. I can work under you. I can handle the administrative side. I stepped closer to him. Julian, I run a construction company. We work with concrete. We work with heavy machinery. We work with deadlines. I would not trust you to mix a bucket of mortar on one of my sites. You would probably drop the shovel and sue the sand for being too rough. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by terror. He knew what was coming next. Please, Julian whispered. He looked at the floor, then at me. Then, his knees buckled. He sank to the ground, right there in the corridor. In his ruined tuxedo shoes, Julian Brightwell knelt before me. Don't release the full file, he begged, his voice trembling. Please, Violet, if you publish the proof of the plagiarism, the architecture board will revoke my license. They will ban me for life. I won't be able to work. I won't be able to do anything. You should have thought of that before you traced David Chen's work, I said. I will do anything, Julian cried. Grabbing the hem of my trousers, I pulled my leg away sharply, as if a rat had touched me. I will sign over my trust fund. I will leave the city. Just don't take my license. That is all I have. I looked down at them. My mother, sobbing into her hands. My father, gray and gasping, trying to bargain with air. My brother, kneeling in the dirt of his own making. 10 years ago, I had stood in the foyer of our mansion, clutching $100 check, begging them to let me stay. I had begged for a chance. I had begged for love, and they had looked at me with cold, stony faces and closed the door. I searched my heart for pity. I searched for that warm, familial instinct that movies tell you is always there. I found nothing. They were not my family. They were strangers. They were just 3 people who had made a bad bet and lost. You told me I was worthless, I said, my voice echoing in the corridor. You stood on that stage and told 300 people that I was a zero. I looked at Julian. Get up. You look ridiculous. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his eyes, hoping for mercy. I am currently the sole creditor of this family, I said. I am in the process of auditing your value, and looking at you now, I think you are worth less than the rubble I clear from a demolition site. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen and held it up. Leo, I said into the device, are the cameras in the corridor active? Yes, boss, Leo's voice came through the earpiece. 5 angles. Good, I said. Live stream it, my mother gasped. What? No. You cannot. Do not worry, I said coldly. I am not like you. I follow the law. I have instructed my team to blur your faces. I do not want to get sued for defamation of character, even though you have no character left to defame. I held the phone up, showing them the feed. It was broadcasting to the VB Dynamics official social media page. The viewer count was climbing by the thousands. The image showed 3 blurred figures begging a woman in a white suit. But the audio, I said. The audio is crystal clear. Turn it off, Arthur shouted. Lunging for the phone, I stepped back easily. The world is listening. Father, they just heard you beg. They heard Julian admit to fraud. They heard everything. You are destroying us, my mother screamed. I am just documenting the demolition, I replied. Transparency is a core value at VB Dynamics. I turned to leave again. I had said everything I needed to say. But before I could push the doors open, they swung inward. A blast of cold night air hit me, followed by a group of men in dark coats. Security, but not hotel security. These men wore the insignia of the city of New York. In the center of the group walked a man I recognized instantly. It was Councilman Robert Vance, the chairman of the City Planning Committee. He was the most powerful man in New York real estate, the man who decided which skylines got built and which ones remained blueprints. Arthur saw him and his eyes lit up. He saw a lifeline. Robert, Arthur cried out, stumbling toward him. Robert, thank God. You have to help us. This insane woman is trying to hijack the project. She is holding the city hostage. You need to intervene. Arthur reached out his hand to Vance. Vance did not even slow down. He did not look at Arthur. He walked right past him as if Arthur were a piece of furniture. He walked past my mother. He walked past Julian. He walked straight to me. Vance stopped in front of me. He was a tall man with a stern face, known for being impossible to bribe. He looked me up and down, taking in the white suit, the calm demeanor, the steel in my spine. He extended his hand. Ms. Brightwell, Vance said. His voice was deep and respectful. I shook his hand. His grip was firm. Councilman Vance. I was watching the feed, Vance said. The presentation inside, the technical data regarding the aquifer. I hope it was informative, I said. It was alarming, Vance corrected. And impressive. You saved the city from a disaster. If that building had been completed with the original specs, we would have had a collapse within 5 years. You prevented a catastrophe. Arthur was standing behind him, his mouth agape. Robert? What are you saying? She is a laborer. She has no degree. Vance turned slowly to look at Arthur. The look of contempt on his face was far worse than anything I could have mustered. She has the only degree that matters to me. Arthur, Vance said. Competence, he turned back to me. Ms. Brightwell, the City Council has been looking for a new direction. We are tired of paper architects who build egos instead of infrastructure. We need someone who understands the ground. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leather case. I was coming here tonight to give this to your father, Vance said. We were going to announce the new chief architect of city planning. Arthur let out a strangled noise. That was the position he had coveted for 20 years. It was the crown jewel of his career. But, Vance continued, after seeing what I just saw, I think we had the wrong Brightwell. He opened the case. Inside was the gold lapel pin of the chief architect. The job is yours, if you want it, Vance said. Complete oversight of the city's zoning, development, and future projects. You would be the final authority on every building permit in New York. I looked at the pin. Then I looked at my father. Arthur looked like he had been shot. The color had left his eyes. This was the final blow. I had not just taken his money. I had not just taken his building. I had taken his dream. I would be honored, I said. Vance took the pin and fastened it to the lapel of my white suit. It glinted under the corridor lights, a small golden star against the white wool. Congratulations, Chief Architect, Vance said. He stepped back. My car is outside. We have a lot of paperwork to discuss regarding the Skyline Nova. I assume you have plans for it? I do, I said. I looked at my family one last time. They were huddled against the wall, shrinking away from the men in suits, shrinking away from me. They looked small. They looked insignificant. Goodbye, Arthur, I said. I did not call him father. I believe you have 23 hours and 50 minutes left to vacate. I turned and walked out into the night. The councilman beside me, leaving the ghosts of my past shivering in the hallway. The air outside was freezing, but for the first time in 10 years, I felt warm. The revolving doors of the glass oculi spun with a heavy, rhythmic swoosh, depositing me onto the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. The night air of New York City hit me instantly. It was January, and the wind coming off the Hudson River was sharp enough to cut skin. It whipped through the canyons of steel and glass, carrying the scent of exhaust fumes, roasting nuts, and the impending snow. Most people would have shivered. Most people would have pulled their coats tighter and hurried into waiting cars. I stood there, unmoving, in my white wool suit. I did not feel the cold. I felt a radiating heat deep within my chest, a furnace of absolute, undeniable victory that kept me warmer than any fur coat ever could. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the freezing air. It tasted clean. It tasted like ownership. Behind me, the chaos inside the ballroom was muffled by the thick glass of the lobby doors, but I could still feel the vibrations of the collapse. I did not need to turn around to know what was happening. I had orchestrated every second of it. My father's phone would be ringing right now. I knew this because I had timed the release of the information perfectly. At the exact moment I stepped off the stage, my lawyer, Marcus, had hit send on a series of emails to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the District Attorney's Office, and the major news networks. Arthur Brightwell was not just facing bankruptcy, he was facing an indictment. The files I had submitted contained proof of 20 years of bid rigging, safety violations, and the systematic embezzlement of pension funds to pay for his lavish lifestyle. The police sirens I heard wailing in the distance, getting louder with every passing second, were not coming for a medical emergency. They were coming for him. The Economic Crimes Unit did not sleep, especially when the evidence was delivered to them wrapped in a bow. I walked past the line of idling limousines. The drivers, men who had spent years ferrying the elite, looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. They had seen people storm out of parties before, usually in tears or in a drunken rage. They had never seen someone walk out with the calm, predatory gait of a lioness leaving a carcass. I ignored the black sedans and the elongated luxury cars. I walked to the far end of the valet zone, where a single, battered vehicle was parked aggressively between a Bentley and a Rolls-Royce. It was my Ford F-150. It was 5 years old, covered in dents, and the paint was the color of dried mud. The rear bumper was held on with duct tape, and the bed was filled with tarps and tools. It was the truck of a laborer. It was the truck of a woman who built things with her hands. The valet, a young man who looked terrified of scratching the Bentley, saw me approaching. He scrambled to get the keys from the hook. He did not look down on me. He held the keys out with both hands, as if offering a sword to a knight. "Here you are, Ms. Brightwell," he said, his voice trembling slightly. He must have been watching the live stream. "Keep the change," I said, pressing a $100 bill into his hand. It was the last remnant of the cash I had brought for the night. "Buy yourself something that isn't rented." I climbed into the driver's seat. The upholstery was cracked leather that smelled of old coffee and sawdust. It was the most comforting smell in the world. I threw the $4,000 white jacket onto the passenger seat, not caring if it wrinkled. I rolled up the sleeves of my silk shirt, revealing the faint scars on my forearms, the burns from welding sparks, the scrapes from rebar. These were my credentials. I put the key in the ignition, but I did not turn it yet. I looked into the rearview mirror, through the glass facade of the building. The scene in the lobby was visible, illuminated like a grotesque diorama. The police had arrived. Blue and red lights flashed against the marble walls, creating a strobe effect that made the movements of my family look jerky and unnatural. They were not standing together. They were not comforting each other in their darkest hour. They were tearing each other apart. I watched as my mother, the woman who preached about family values and blood loyalty, shoved Arthur hard in the chest. I could not hear her words, but I could read her lips. She was screaming. She was pointing at him, then at herself, hysterical with the realization that her social standing was gone. She was blaming him. She was distancing herself, trying to tell the officers that she knew nothing, that she was a victim. Arthur was trying to push past her, trying to get to the door, trying to run, but he was blocked by Julian. My brother, the coward, had grabbed our father by the lapels of his ruined tuxedo. Julian was crying, his face twisted into an ugly mask of fear. He was shouting, pointing at the building, pointing at the police. He was likely trying to cut a deal before he was even arrested, trying to pin the fraud entirely on Arthur to save his own license. It was a shark tank, and the sharks were eating their own. I watched them for a long minute. A part of me, the part that was still the 19-year-old girl shivering in the rain, waited for a pang of guilt. I waited to feel sad for them. I waited to feel the urge to go back, to bail them out, to use my newfound power to shield them from the consequences of their actions. I felt nothing. No, that is not true. I felt a profound sense of order. The universe was balancing its books. Gravity was doing its work. Structures built on rot eventually collapse. I had simply kicked out the final rotten beam. There would be no redemption arc for them. There would be no tearful reconciliation in a prison visiting room. I would not pay their legal fees. I would not visit them. I would let the system they had manipulated for so long grind them down into dust. My phone buzzed on the dashboard mount. It was a text message from Mike, my foreman. He was a man of few words, a 60-year-old veteran of the trade who had been with me since the days of Ironclad Solutions. He had been on standby, waiting for the signal. Mike: saw the news? Hell of a show. Boss, the crew is asking about tomorrow. The concrete trucks are scheduled for 6 a.m. Do we proceed with the pour for the atrium? I looked at the message, then I looked up at the towering skeleton of the Skyline Nova. It was a beautiful design. In a way, Julian's stolen curves were elegant. The spiral was graceful, but it was poisoned. Every inch of that steel was infected with the lies and the arrogance of the Brightwell name. It was a monument to theft. I could not finish it. If I finished it, I would be building a memorial to my brother's fraud. I picked up the phone and typed my reply. My fingers moved steadily. Violet: cancel the concrete. Send the trucks back. A pause, then 3 dots appeared as Mike typed back. Mike: cancel? We are on a tight schedule. What are the orders? I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that reached my eyes. Violet: bring in the wrecking balls. Bring in the cutters. We are not pouring. Mike: we are tearing it down? Viola said, demolish the entire old design. We are going to strip it down to the foundation piles. We are going to burn the blueprints. Mike: and then? Violet: and then we build from scratch. My design, my specs, a new name, a new tower, one that actually stands up. I hit send. The decision was final. I would lose millions in sunk costs, but I didn't care. I would erase the Skyline Nova from the skyline before it was even finished. I would build something honest in its place, something made of steel and sweat. Not theft and vanity. I turned the key. The truck's engine roared to life, a rough, throaty growl that sounded like a beast waking up. It was a stark contrast to the purr of the limousines. I shifted into gear. I pulled out of the parking spot. forcing a Maybach to wait for me. The driver honked, but I didn't even glance at him. I had the right of way. I owned the road now. I drove slowly past the front entrance of the glass oculi. I saw the officers putting handcuffs on Arthur. I saw my mother collapsing onto a bench, weeping into her hands. I saw Julian being led away. His head hung low. I did not stop. I did not wave. I accelerated, merging into the stream of traffic on Fifth Avenue. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red around me. The wind rushed through the slightly open window, cooling the heat of the victory. I was alone. I had no family. I had no parents. I had no brother. But as I looked at the skyline of New York, at the jagged teeth of the buildings biting into the night sky, I realized I was not empty. I was full. I was full of potential. I was full of the future. I reached up and touched the gold pin on my lapel. The chief architect of the city. The game was over. I had won. But the work was just beginning. I drove into the darkness, leaving the glittering ruins of the Brightwell Empire in my rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller until they were nothing but a speck of dust in the distance. They called me uneducated. I taught them the final lesson. And the tuition was everything they had. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey of grit, betrayal, and absolute justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a bustling city like New York, or somewhere quiet and peaceful? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Violet's revenge. Was it too harsh, or was it exactly what they deserved? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Blue Payback. Smash that like button. And if you really want to support the content and help this story reach more people, please hit the hype button. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.